So before we launch into this week's episode, you might be interested to know about our event coming up, face-to-face event, Inspiring Prevention of Eating Disorders and Body Image Issues in London, September the 30th, Camden, London, 2023. Really hope you'll be able to make it. At the moment, it's just going to be a face-to-face event. However, if there is a lot of demand, we might be doing it online as well. So I have brought together many different professionals in the field who are passionate about the prevention of eating disorders and body image issues. So we're going to have there, obviously myself, Kath Cunahan, psychotherapy mum on Instagram, talking about the early years as foundation for good mental well-being. We're going to have the binge eating therapist there, Sarah Dosanjh, talking about the hidden eating disorders, 85% of people not being underweight with an eating disorder. We've got Dr. Kaz Bomba with diagnosis, early intervention and support, really being able to support medical professionals, teachers and more. George Mycock is going to be there of My Own Mind, talking about how eating disorder services can be improved for greater access for men and those with muscularity orientated issues. We've got Victoria Kleinsman coming to talk about body image and radical self-love. We have Rose White talking about intuitive eating principles. The eating disorder nutritionist Anne Richardson talking all about is sugar the enemy, healthy week in schools, reframing the whole way we help our children develop a healthy relationship with food. We have Jane Hartley talking about developing a healthy relationship with exercise and movement, and many more people. So I really hope you'll be able to make it. The link is in the show notes. It's $149.99, which is an absolute bargain for all these different speakers in one day. You get all your food and refreshments included, and it's a face-to-face event. It's going to be so amazing because it just feels like so long since we've been able to kind of properly really get together in these kind of spaces. So much of it has been on Zoom, and Zoom is amazing. It has been a credible thing for my business. But I'm so looking forward to just getting everyone in one space and to really have that sort of collective energy and consciousness and inspiration and transformation to really think about how we can improve things for going forward for the future. So hope to see you there. Link is in the show notes. Hello and welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. This is a podcast to help you find peace with food and overcome disordered eating. And I'm Harriet Frew, aka the Eating Disorder Therapist. And I'm so excited to share with you all kinds of stories, tips, information and guest interviews to help you on your journey in finding peace with food. So thank you so much for listening today. So today is a bite-sized episode, and it is a question from one of you lovely listeners asking all about how to cope with feeling full. So great topic, something that so many people struggle with in eating disorder recovery. So going to talk lots about this, but I think what is really helpful before we even address managing feeling full, what is really helpful is to look at hunger, look at our eating patterns, look at all the kind of background sort of steps which are helpful to have in place, which are going to help you manage your fullness. Because if your hunger and appetite and structure around eating is all over the place, it's going to be so hard for you to manage feeling full. Because just imagine if you are perhaps not eating all day, maybe you're getting kind of IBS type symptoms, stomach cramps, perhaps you're getting bloated, drinking a lot of fluid, for example, and then you finally get to eat later in the day and your poor stomach is thinking, I'm not ready for food, I'm not expecting food, I'm not used to being fed regularly. And then you're probably going to experience quite a lot of uncomfortable symptoms around fullness, which are going to make dealing with feeling full even more tricky. So as I've been reflecting on this question, I really thought it is really helpful to address some of these other things first, and then I'm going to talk more specifically about how to deal with feeling full. So excuse that long waffle into the episode. So I guess what is so helpful, first of all, is to starting to think about tuning into your hunger, honouring your hunger. Now, this is really hard if you have an eating disorder because you might have completely lost touch with your hunger. Your hunger cues might be all over the place. but learning to work with your body's hunger signals is a crucial part of healing your relationship with food. But before we launch into this, of course, it's completely understandable that it may be really hard for you at this moment in time to trust your hunger and appetite signals. Because if you've been dieting, restricting your eating, delaying eating, living by food rules, of course you're going to be out of touch with your hunger. You won't know when you're hungry, you won't know when you're craving, you won't trust your appetite, and you won't know when you're full. And you might be quite terrified of your hunger. And your hunger might seem quite black and white in its presentation. I think this is really, really common when you have had an eating disorder or have an eating disorder. You might find that your hunger is either almost absent, where you just don't feel hungry at all, you feel it's almost switched off, and that might feel very safe. Or you might find that your hunger is at other times ferociously overbearing, and there's nothing much in between. And if you're holding your weight at a place that is too low for your body, below your set point, you may as well be having some really intense feelings of hunger, again, interspersed with perhaps numbness around hunger, but this can make hunger start to feel a very scary sensation. And you might worry, if you're in that place, that if you began to listen to your body, that your eating would go out of control. And I remember the days myself when I had an eating disorder, when I would be very, very restrictive, and I would feel kind of almost like when I was in those, in inverted commas, good phases, on cloud nine, massively in control, euphoric, felt that I had everything in the bag almost. And then the waves of intense hunger would absolutely hit me and catch up with me. And I would actually feel then addicted to food, and it would feel like I just could not stop eating. And it would almost feel like however much food I ate, I could never ever feel full. And then it might suddenly all kick in. I'd feel suddenly just horribly overfull and bloated and disgusted with myself, etc. So it's very normal in a way, if you're in a disordered eating pattern with food, that all these signs and symptoms might be all over the place. So how do we learn to undereat or starve? So when you're deliberately restricting your eating, your hunger starts to feel normal. And what your body will be trying to do, or what your body does, is if you haven't been eating normally, whatever normal is, but I guess, when I'm talking normally, I guess I'm talking about eating regularly, responding to hunger and fullness cues, etc. But when you've been ignoring all of those things, when you've been going for really long periods without eating, feeling hungry starts to feel like the normal thing. Or what your body will start to do is it will almost start to even not communicate your hunger anymore in the same way. So you might lose hunger signals. So you won't feel like that rumbling stomach. You won't feel that kind of even preoccupation with food. Your body almost starts to give up the communication in trying to tell you that you are hungry. You might sometimes know that you need food, so you might feel faint or dizzy or just not feel really on the planet, but you might have lost those signals of more conventional hunger cues. Another way that you start to lose these cues as well is if you fill up a lot on diet drinks, coffee, drinking water all day. This again can really disrupt your hunger and appetite cues. Often as well, short term, if you drink a lot of fluid, if you drink a lot of caffeinated drinks, in the short term you almost numb your hunger. But then often as well, you can get a real backlash later when you feel ferociously hungry and out of control. Another thing that impacts your undereating or starving might be being exposed to chronic stress. This can really impact your appetite. Chronic stress places you in that fight-flight mode. You're preparing to flee the bear, you're looking for danger. And of course, when we're in that fight-flight mode, eating is not seen as a primary focus because of staying safe feels like the paramount, most important thing to do. But of course, if we're experiencing chronic stress, over a prolonged period, it can really disrupt our eating patterns. And then when we're not eating due to stress, and then we start to perhaps lose our hunger signals, and we can kind of get into a cycle really where we're not nourishing ourselves properly. Another way we can learn to undereat or starve is if you haven't had enough food available. I know several clients I've worked with perhaps grew up in a family where there wasn't enough food, they weren't able to afford food, had limited access to food, and they became very used to being hungry as a child, just like having to perhaps sneak food into their room, going to bed feeling hungry. And this almost became like a normal sensation that they hadn't even appreciated that, they weren't being nourished fully. Another way we can learn to undereat or starve is using exercise as a distraction from hunger. Now, we know as well, like, experiments done with kind of rats, that, that when they over-exercise, they lose interest in food and they will just be kind of like spinning on the kind of hamster wheel, exercising. And I know many people that struggle with anorexia nervosa or other sort of restrictive eating, that exercise becomes a way to distract from hunger. Often when you over-exercise, you're not feeling that hunger in the same way, but obviously, you're kind of overriding your hunger signals, and it's not very healthy. And what about the other way? How do you learn to overeat or binge eat? Well, I guess, if you are restricting your eating, it's a very natural survival mechanism that you will sometimes binge eat because of your body just needs to get those calories in when you've had long periods of restriction. So if you're undernourished, your body will strongly crave the nutrients it's missing. This is a survival mechanism. And dieting can be a hugely powerful trigger for binge eating. And this can be true whatever your weight or size. It could be if you're really underweight, or if you're overweight, or if you're normal within your set point range. If you've been restricting your eating, dieting, it's very natural that your body will be wanting to binge. Another way that we can learn to overeat or binge eat is just eating at unpredictable and irregular times. And this can result in large blood sugar swings and then can trigger the urge to overeat. Poor sleep can also be a trigger. It disrupts our hunger hormones and increases cravings. I know for myself, to this day, if I haven't had good sleep, I will definitely eat a lot more sugar and things the day after a bad night's sleep. And I'm quite accepting and compassionate to myself around that, but it's a definite sign to me if I haven't had good sleep. It really disrupts my hunger. And when you're tired as well, isn't everything more of an effort? If you're irritable, overwhelmed with the tasks at hand, you may feel stressed, less tolerant of others, and you may turn to food to cope. And lack of sleep, it really does make you hungrier. The hormones that regulate hunger, ghrelin and also feeling full, leptin, are disrupted when you don't get enough sleep and you're out of balance. Another one is drinking alcohol. When we drink alcohol, sometimes it can make us feel really tired and groggy, like the next day, blood sugar lows, we're craving more. And also perhaps on the occasion when we're drinking more alcohol, our resistance is down, we're more likely to kind of get the munchies, mindlessly eat, etc., etc. Also, in terms of our hunger being disrupted around overeating, binge eating, if we end up purging, this can really disrupt hunger signals as well. Because obviously if you're purging through whatever means, but I'm thinking particularly through vomiting, you are sort of ingesting a lot of food, you're then getting rid of it, and your poor body is very, very confused. So you can often feel like really craving and hungry again later. Also as well, if you're eating food that's highly palatable and easy to overeat on, it can be difficult to regulate hunger. Now, you know that I am a strong advocate for the all foods fit model. I don't think that any foods should be banned or forbidden. I absolutely promote food neutrality and a peaceful relationship with food. But I guess if you are predominantly just eating those highly palatable foods, say getting up in the morning and having biscuits for breakfast or something, again, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think if you are having several eating occasions every day where you're eating these highly palatable foods, again, your blood sugar is going to be more all over the place and you're going to be more prone probably to binging, overeating, and also just finding it hard to regulate your hunger. Another thing as well is when you're holding your weight very low. So when you're underweight, and I'm not just going on BMI here, I think it's really important for you to tune into your body, because of you may be within what is a normal, healthy, in inverted commas, BMI range, but actually for your body that is very restrictive and it is not helping you. So if you are underweight for your body, for your personal body, the biological drive to eat will be really strong. You'll be much more sensitive as well to the sight, smell and flavour of food, and it will leave you massively vulnerable to out of control eating. Now, I remember myself when I was in restrictive phases. I remember, like, if I was going into a cafe or something, I would really notice if someone had left a piece of cake on their plate on the table, or after dinner, I'd even notice like crumbs on the table, or I'd want to kind of clean out all the last bits of food from the leftovers or the saucepan or something. Whereas today, when I'm fully nourished and taking care of my sort of nutritional needs and I'm not restricting, I wouldn't even notice going into a cafe if there was a cake left on a plate, maybe unless it was like particularly delicious or standing out, but I wouldn't be tuned into food in that way. Another distinction I think to make as well is when you're weight restoring from anorexia, your body needs a huge amount of food in recovery. Now, I think as well, what's really important to say as well is that can feel like binge eating, but it's not binge eating. It's just a natural response to your physiological needs. And this can be a really daunting phase. I think of numerous clients I've worked with who just feel like they're constantly eating, that they're constantly hungry, and it just doesn't turn off. But this is a phase, and I just say to you as well, if you're in that phase, the only way out is through, but it's so worth it, okay? And you've always got to just like cling to the roller coaster and ride that phase to come out the other side. And I promise you that ferocious overriding hunger will start to reduce as you come through it. So how do you begin to reset a disturbed appetite control system if you've been really restrictive or perhaps overeating, binge eating a lot? So you're moving away from dieting, of course, which is going to help with this, and the dieting mindset as well. So that sort of mental restriction when you've got that constant judgment around food. And of course, I know this is really, really challenging, and you're probably going to have lots and lots of fears around this. I think as well, what's almost impossible to do is if you've had disordered eating, it's quite tricky to just jump straight into intuitive eating. Now, I know some people in recovery go all in, they dive in the deep end head first and they ride the wave, and that's how they do it. And I think for some people that works really well. In my recovery, I kind of went all in just because actually it wasn't really even a massively calculated decision. I just found that once I started eating, my hunger kicked in, and it was just the way that my body wanted to do it. But sometimes it can be helpful to do it more incrementally and with more structure, but you need to perhaps think about what's going to work for you. But as I'm saying, really, it's quite tricky to launch straight into intuitive eating. So you're going to be so vulnerable in the beginning as well. If you've been in those restrictive phases or restrictive binge phases, you're going to be really vulnerable as you start eating more to being chaotic with your eating, wanting to eat all the foods that you previously deprived yourself of. And then you can feel very tempted to go back to dieting because you can just feel like, oh my God, I just can't do this. It's just so scary and overwhelming. Don't go back to dieting though. This is just a really, really necessary phase. It's a bumpy phase. It's part of the recovery road. And in the short term, you will feel at sea with your eating. However, these are stepping stones in the process. So what can you do to really help with this? So the good old regular eating that I'm always banging on about. So start to eat regularly every 2 to 3 hours so your body always knows that food is coming. So when you're trying to reset your hunger and appetite system, you can't just rely on hunger alone because your hunger's going to be all over the place. Your body needs some retraining to understand that food is coming consistently and that you're not going to suddenly be like plunged into starvation. So the good old 6 eats a day, 3 meals and 3 snacks. If that feels just completely overwhelming and unbearable, I think you just need to start where you're at. Start with just baby steps with that, okay? And what happens is when we do the regular eating, it allows our blood sugar to stabilize. It allows your body to get used to being fed regularly. It helps your hunger signals to be stimulated again, to kick in. And it will also really help prevent episodes of binge eating or overeating because you're far less likely to reach the ravenous hunger levels, which understandably come after restriction and then can just drive that huge urge to overeat. So what to eat as well? I mean, again, all foods fit. No foods are forbidden. We're working towards food neutrality here. But if you are really trying to stabilize your blood sugar and do regular eating, it's good to have balance around your meals. So trying to include some protein, some carbohydrate, some fats, maybe some vegetables at every single main meal occasion, because this will really help stabilize your blood sugar. Because if you, say for example, are missing out on carbohydrates through the day, by the end of the day you're going to be massively craving sugar because the brain just demands glucose at all costs. So you're going to be again much more vulnerable to binge eating. So really see that having more balance in your meals is inoculation against binge eating. It's going to really help reduce your kind of over hunger and cravings and help you to feel so much more stable around food. Now, I would say when you're in this phase of really trying to do your regular eating and to stabilize blood sugar, make sure that you're introducing carbohydrates if you're not already. And at your main meals, go for those slow release carbohydrates if you can. Now, I don't mean just vegetables here. I mean things like whole grain rice maybe, or pasta, having some bread, introducing some of those carbs, quinoa maybe, anything that's going to really just help stabilize your blood sugar. Now, you're also allowed to eat the fast release carbohydrates too if you want to, because that's going to be super helpful and help with that inoculation against binge eating. However, I would just say to you, when you are doing this, just think about when in the day you are including them. So even as a real act of self-care, like for myself, every day I probably often have some chocolate in the afternoon, but I will often pair that with something that is going to help stabilize my blood sugar at the same time. So I might have a handful of almonds or something. I might have had some yogurt or something that's going to just help stabilize my blood sugar so I don't get that crash. And for me, this isn't like a rigid rule, sometimes I'm just going to eat the donut on an empty stomach and off I go and carry on my day and nothing bad will happen. But it's more, my focus here is thinking much more about self-care, regulating, stabilizing blood sugar rather than like a fixed rule, okay? And I guess it's just tuning into your own body as well and what works for you. So when you start to do more of your regular eating, you're stabilizing blood sugar, you might find that you start to get a bit more in tune with your hunger cues. But expect your hunger cues to be a bit all over the place. Don't give yourself a hard time about it, and you might find it really hard to trust or recognize your hunger. And this is so normal. Be compassionate to yourself, because if you've ignored your body's natural signals for so long, and you've just been relying on a wellness plan or rules or intermittent fasting or someone else or something else telling you when to eat, you're going to really struggle initially to trust your hunger or to know when you're hungry. But these are some signs to indicate you might be hungry. You might have a sort of it's like a hollow tummy, like feeling that rumbling. I know for me, I tend to only feel a hollow tummy if I'm really, really hungry. But some of these other signs are definitely signs for me if I'm hungry. So things like just feeling a bit edgy, a bit irritable, can't really concentrate on the task I'm doing because I'm quite distracted by food. Maybe I'll start to search for food, so I'm suddenly much more aware of food in my environment. If I'm hungry, my preoccupation with food will increase. Now, I think if you get really hungry, you can sometimes feel sick, feel lightheaded, start to feel quite ill. And I guess then really your hunger has probably gone a bit too far, because I think once you start to feel sick and lightheaded, you might not then want to eat. And actually your body really needs that fuel, but then you're not able to give yourself that fuel because you feel sick, and it's a horrible perpetuating a negative cycle. Other things as well might be that your mouth starts to water, or maybe you start to look at the clock. You're starting to think, actually, how long is it until I can eat? Or maybe you sort of go into the cupboard, opening it and closing it. These are all signs, this increased preoccupation with food. So have a think about your hunger signals. Do you even know what your hunger signals are? And if you have no clue, you can maybe just sort of track it over the course of a day and just be really curious and compassionate like a scientist. Okay, so now I've talked about all that kind of background stuff. I'm now going to get on to actually how to deal with feeling full. So excuse the big entry into this point, but I think you can probably appreciate after everything I've just been talking about that unless you deal with your hunger, like your regular eating, your stabilizing blood sugar, your self-care around eating, it's going to be really, really hard to deal with feeling full. So you need to kind of have that kind of back work, is that the right expression, in place first. So let's talk about dealing with feeling full. So if you have a good relationship with food, then feeling full or satisfied is interpreted as a good feeling. It indicates you finished eating and that your body has been nourished, you feel satisfied, contented, and you no longer feel hungry. So I just think for myself, actually, I wouldn't even really have too much of a thought about feeling full. It's more just like a fairly pleasant sensation. You almost feel like you've put fuel in the tank, and actually now you can just kind of get on with your day a bit more because you're satisfied, you're not preoccupied with food. So it feels like a quite content, pleasant sensation to me. However, if your interpretation of feelings has become distorted through disordered eating, you probably interpret hunger as good and feeling full and satiated as bad or extremely anxiety provoking. So this makes it very difficult to manage. And you may as well have become very used to eating smaller portions and your stomach has adjusted to this. So definitely in the beginning, when you start to eat more, eating normally may feel extremely uncomfortable and you initially may experience bloating and a lot of discomfort. And that can be really, really hard because of, it's your worst fear in a way to be more bloated, to see your stomach distended. I guess it's kind of like a normal part of the process that you might have to go through as your body is adjusting to getting more food. Now, if you've been prone to binging or overeating, you may often eat to the point of being really uncomfortably full, where you've completely overridden your normal fullness and satiety cues. And this is also really difficult to manage because physically as well, if you eat to that point, it can be so painful and mentally very distressing. And I can remember that when I was in the depths of bulimia, I could eat volumes of food. I can't even imagine actually now how I used to fit it all in. But, I'd get to the point where I was absolutely full to bursting and it was very, very painful and uncomfortable. So what's really helpful first is to start to think about creating a different relationship towards feeling full. So, and I'm talking comfortably full here, as though you've nourished your body, not stuffed to the point that you feel unwell. So what kind of signals might we be noticing in relation to feeling full? So feeling full, or what kind of thoughts would be helpful to notice around feeling full, which can be more helpful and productive? So things like, feeling full is a helpful sign that I've eaten. Feeling full is a signal that my body is fueled and can provide me with energy and nutrition going forward. And feeling full means that I can be distracted from food and get on with my day. And I don't need to feel anxious about being full. This is a perfectly normal and natural body sensation. I'm readjusting to this, I'm accepting it, and the feeling of fullness will pass. So trying to listen more to your body around the fullness, it's going to take time to feel comfortable with feeling full. Now, I just find as well with so many of my clients, they're so kind of micro focused on feelings of fullness, almost like the physical feeling. And then also they're looking at their tummy, which may be a little bit more distended after eating. That's really normal. And they're so focused on that. So I guess it's just trying to shift our relationship there, just trying to recognize in a way it's just a completely normal, natural thing, in the same way that when we breathe air into our lungs and we breathe out, our lungs expand. When we breathe in, our lungs will get smaller. When we breathe out, actually eating is a very, very natural process in the same way. So what you're going to have to do in the beginning as well is almost live through feeling full, managing your anxiety and trusting that your body is not going to change significantly through one meal. So you're going to become more trusting of that feeling. So every time that you manage another snack or meal and tolerate that fullness feeling, you're a step closer to reducing anxiety and becoming more accepting of this. And what you might need to do is Set a timer after a meal where you organise a distraction activity, so you're not so preoccupied with feeling full. And be really disciplined with yourself in that time. Like, don't go and look in the mirror. Don't go and stand on the weighing scales. Don't keep feeling or pinching your body. Don't be looking for evidence that you are bloated, because if you do all of that, you will find the evidence and it will create more anxiety and all of that. Not helpful. So I guess it's a bit of an art as well, like to relearn managing eating to the point of satisfaction, the kind of sweet point of feeling full. Now, I know for me these days, if I'm having a meal, I don't even really think about managing fullness. It's become a very natural, intuitive process where I don't really have to overthink it. Now, when you're in recovery, you're going to be so much more tuned into it, thinking, am I comfortably full? Am I over full? Have I got it right? And I guess what I'd say to you as well is that it's going to be a bit of an imperfect process of learning to trust your body again. So sometimes when you're trying to tune in more to your fullness and eat that sort of like ideal satiety level for your body, that sometimes you're going to overeat a little bit, sometimes you're going to undereat a little bit, but it's all part of the learning process, okay? And in a way, you're only going to find your sweet spot by making a few mistakes and, sometimes undereating a bit, sometimes overeating a bit. But, in time, just allowing yourself to go through the process of, eating something, tolerating the fullness, allowing your body to sort of respond and take in that nourishment, and for the natural kind of stomach distension that happens after eating to rise and fall, etc., you will become much more comfortable with this. Okay, so what can help with this as well is, I'd say, when you go into an eating episode, generally, don't go into an eating episode absolutely ravenous. Now, of course, sometimes this is going to happen. Again, if you're doing more of the regular eating, stabilizing blood sugar is less likely to happen. But, if you are restricting all day and then you suddenly start eating, you might just find it really hard to eat slowly. And because of you're absolutely so hungry, your body just wants the food and you want to stuff it in. So I'd say, rather than eating when you're 10 out of 10 starving, you want to be aiming more for a 6 to an 8, okay? You don't want to be thinking, I'm so ravenous that I could eat everything and anything in sight, which is just a sign of overhunger, really. And you're going to be so much more vulnerable to eating quickly, not registering the taste or fully enjoying the food, and then kind of seeking more. So firstly, I guess it's trying not to eat when you're absolutely starving. Again, the regular eating can help, because I think in the beginning, you can't always trust your body, but actually having some routine and stability around your eating will help you start to develop that self-trust in your body. And it's almost going to be a bit of a sort of safety measure to make sure that you are always sort of fueling yourself enough. Because I think sometimes we are so out of touch with hunger and fullness that it's very easy to think we're absolutely fine, no hunger at all, and then half an hour later, absolutely ravenous, finishing off a full bag of crisps, family-sized bag of crisps or something. So slow down. Try and allow your body to register the food you're eating. Listen more to your body. Do a bit of the kind of mindful eating if you can. You don't have to be a perfect mindful eater, but just being a bit more connected to the tastes, textures, and smells can be really, really helpful. Also, sitting down to eat, having some ceremony, make it a bit of an occasion, that can really help as well. If you're eating on the run at your computer screen when you're distracted by something else, again, makes it really, really hard sometimes to, register that eating experience fully and to register your hunger and fullness. Now, often as well, we would recommend doing nothing else while eating. I think sometimes people in recovery, particularly for anorexia nervosa, actually appreciate the distraction of something when they're eating. So I think you need to think about what is personally really helpful for you. But I'd say generally, trying to do nothing else while eating, just to be focused on the eating, can be really, really helpful. Okay. And, research has showed as well that when people watch TV as well, they tend to eat a lot more. They tend to be a lot more mindless with their eating. And that's not to say, again, that you can never watch TV and eat at the same time, but it's just being mindful and thinking about what's going to work for you. And allow your hunger and fullness signals to catch up. It's going to be hard to trust your feelings of hunger and fullness to begin with, But if you're still wanting to eat more after a meal, maybe just give yourself a little pause first, because of maybe if you hadn't eaten enough all day, perhaps you actually need to eat more than you have allocated for your evening meal. And actually, it's just a natural, healthy sign that you're still hungry. But if you have got a bit over hungry, sometimes you might eat very quickly and then it's hard for your hunger and sort of fullness cues to catch up with you. So sometimes it can be helpful just to have a little pause, maybe go and do a little task for 10 minutes. Then if you're still hungry, eat something else, or you might find that your hunger and fullness cues have caught up with you. Another thing as well, I guess, is to notice emotional triggers. Like if you are thinking, actually, I do feel quite full after eating, but maybe there's an emotional trigger that is driving you to eat. Perhaps you're tired or feeling low or anxious. You're looking for that sort of stimulation through eating. So again, something to really, really notice. So I hope this has given you a few pointers for managing hunger and fullness. And I'd say the main thing is just to be brave, to practice. The only way out really is through. And living through the behaviour change will allow you confidence to trust your body more and to be able to make greater changes. Because I think we can overthink the whole fullness thing. We can analyse it till the cows come home. But in a way, it's only by doing the kind of work almost of, eating something, tolerating that kind of fullness, tuning more with your body, allowing yourself to experience the sensations, starting to tune in a bit more. Through the actions, you're going to be able to develop more trust. I say again, if you're someone who finds it really hard to tolerate fullness, perhaps you're very tempted to purge. If you experience that, I'd say just try and at least delay purging to begin with, okay? Put that window of pause in, okay? Because of sometimes we have become so conditioned in a way to not be able to tolerate any feeling of fullness that we want to get rid of it straight away. But actually, your body knows what to do. You will be able to tolerate this more than you realise, okay? So it's almost like sometimes you've got to ride through that wave of anxiety, and that's where you might need to have your little distraction techniques or things to support you. So it does take patience, time and commitment to reset your hunger and fullness signals. So be kind and compassionate with yourself in this process, because there will be lots of bumps in the road, but your body will begin to respond as you treat it with love and respect. Okay, so wishing you luck with all of this. And I'm very aware as well, I'm afraid this hasn't been a very bite-sized episode, has it? I think it's probably about 40 minutes in total. But hope you enjoy it. Hope you find it helpful. And thank you for being here today. So if you're not following me already, do seek me out on Instagram at the Eating Disorder Therapist _ If you want more podcasts, extra video content, do check out my bite-sized eating disorder therapy. The link is in the show notes. You can try it for a week for free, and then it's only £5 a month for access to loads of additional content. So do go and check it out. If you like the podcast, it's really even more resources to support you. Also, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd follow, rate and review, massively appreciate it. It helps it reach so many more listeners, and it's just incredible to think that so many people are listening all over the world. So thank you so much for your support. So thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.